Now on to our topic of today, doing business in China, the new normal with Chinese characteristics. Many of you may be aware that this year is the 150th anniversary of BASF. And as I've been hearing over lunch, it's the 130th anniversary of BASF in China. And on top of that, after a few years of being based in Hong Kong, Dr. Martin Brudermüller is leaving us to return to Germany, where he'll be based as CTO for BASF and the head of the chemical segment. But as we were saying over lunch, leaving isn't quite the same as it used to be 20 years ago. People circulate and move around so much these days that I'm sure we'll have a chance to see Dr. Brudermüller again. It's a delight to have him here to speak. He will talk to us about his experiences in China, and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A after. So, Dr. Brudermüller.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, Tara, for the kind introduction. And thank you also for inviting me again to speak at the FCC. It's always a pleasure to be here and to have the chance today to talk to you a bit about BASF's perspective of doing business in China. These days, when it is about China, it is all about the new normal. Rather than adding another definition of the new normal to the many that already exists, I would rather like to take a look back to the old normal. For us, this year is, as Tara said, particularly suitable for such a look back because we are celebrating not only the 150 years birthday of the company, but also the 130th year of doing business in China. Actually, in 1885, for a German company like ours, China was a new market on a largely unknown continent. But in that year, only 20 years after the foundation, BASF already has sent its first director, named Theodor Sprösser, to China. And I'm pretty sure that at that time, Theodor also was worried a little bit about his new normal and what it would be for him to be in that country. So did my predecessors at the board from those days, by the way, and they determined, and I quote from the minutes of BASF board meeting, because we have them still from 1885, considering the special danger associated with a journey such as the one taken by Mr. Sprösser, the Board of Executive Directors has decided to offer Mr. Sprösser a possible guarantee in the form of a life insurance charged to the company's account up to a value of 100,000 marks. But they also expected that the new normal for Theodor would soon become an old normal for him, because the minutes continue saying the company would pay the premium for 1 year, and after the end of 1 year, Mr. Sprösser would either have to continue the premium payments himself or cancel the policy. So I guess in today's world, one would say this is a mixture of employer's responsibility and employee empowerment. So Theodor, now well assured and well insured, set off to explore new customer space for BASF products in China. The BASF management had a clear expectation. There must be a market for BASF's blue dyes, for example in the blue jackets, commonly worn by millions of people throughout China. And they were right. The expedition was successful, and by 1900, sales to China have already tripled. And today, China is no longer distant or exotic for BASF. On the contrary, it is an integral part of our company. We now serve customers in basically all industries, and with around a staff of 8,000 people, we operate an R&D and production network of more than 26 sites, including one of the most modern and efficient chemical sites in China, our Verbund site in the city of Nanjing, which we built and now run together with our partner Sinopec with a production of more than 3 million tons of products every year. These 130 years have been a long journey. And even so, it is the journey of an individual company. It can tell you a lot about the development of China. That is why we decided to write down our history in China. And if you are interested to learn more about how doing business in China has changed, I can really recommend our book, breaking new ground. The book will be available at bookstores here also in Hong Kong, including the Chinese version, which is already available in the Jinghap bookstore in North Point, or you can order the European or German version either on Amazon or at the website of Hoffmann Lacampe, who brought this book out. So you will see that it is very interesting to see what has changed over time. In fact, the book describes the early years for BASF in China in a very vivid and colorful way. But regarding the book, what struck me most when I read it the first time is to see what actually did not change. If you look at some of the aspects of doing business which really stay stable over more than a century, it may mean that they are really an integrated part of the fabrics of society, in this case, the Chinese characteristics. This could then allow us to better understand, to a certain extent, what will change in the future and what will not. So let me take you through these major areas that I see as crucial for the further development of China: growth, business environment, and innovation. Of course, growth has been at the center of China's story from the very beginning. The idea of rapidly growing a business and just selling one item to each person in China is as old as business itself. And the BASF board members in 1885 were not different. They imagined that every resident in China would wear a blue jacket dyed with BASF blue aniline dye. And every company entering the China market came with similar hopes. Deng Xiaoping's opening and reform policy pretty much made these expectations become reality. Double-digit growth rates have characterized the development of China in a historical, unique way, and they have become sort of the old normal. And that is why the new normal, growth rates of maybe below 7%, is creating quite some anxiety. At times, the public discussion, in my eyes, has become a bit ridiculous, as it seems to suggest that the Chinese economy is shrinking. Of course, we are far from that. Mathematically, it has long been clear that double-digit growth rates would not go forever. And we are now at the point where we also need to look at absolute growth. Last year's 7% GDP growth translates into 550 billion US dollars. Just be aware that is the GDP of entire Sweden. That is why we need to consider China's contribution to world GDP. In 1870, China's GDP amounted to 17% of the global GDP, and in 2014, it accounted for around 15%, after going through a trough of around 5% in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. If you consider that since 2006, the absolute annual growth of China was above that of the US, we must expect that China's share of world GDP will further increase, and projections see it around 20% in 2025. So there is one Chinese characteristic that applies to both old and new normal: the sheer size of the Chinese market. What does this mean for a company? Well, in 1913, BASF sales for China made up 14% of BASF total sales. Last year, when we generated sales of about 5.5 billion in the Greater China region, it was a share of roughly 8% of our global sales. That shows we still have quite some potential in China, and as any other international company, we cannot afford not to be there. This doesn't mean that China isn't facing tremendous challenges, and in fact, they are huge, and you know all of them: overcapacities, credit bubble, demographic changes, Hoku system, SOEs, and the environmental situation, just as a few examples. The list continues, and the Chinese government is very frank about that fact, that tackling these issues will be a painful process. As Premier Li put it, it's not nail clipping, it is wrist slashing. Drastic language, and we will see how strongly the Chinese government will follow up on this. I'm confident that they will, and that the new normal will indeed be characterized by a different economic structure with healthier growth. For companies like ours, this is not to be afraid of. On the contrary, this will offer major growth opportunities, such as mobile catalysts, emission catalysts, battery materials, clean water technologies, or new materials for automotive, just to mention a few. If we agree that the new normal growth rates are still quite attractive, then the next question for a company headquartered outside of China is, can we really fully participate in this growth? What does the business environment look like? If you read the chapters in our books that describe the design and the setting up of our Verbund site in Nanjing, by now representing an investment of 4.5 billion US dollars together with our partner Sinopec, then you will see that the old normal business environment was highly political. All the discussions in setting up our joint venture company with Sinopec involved highest levels of the party and the government. Well, you could say they have been sitting on the negotiation table. After all, Sinopec had only emerged from the ministerial structure in the early 1980s. And the chemical industry was one of the strategic pillar industries of China. But of course, the government influence also applied basically all the other industries. The new normal regarding the business environment is that the market is to play a decisive role in pushing reforms. At least that is what the third plenum of the 18th Party Congress stated in November 2013. This encouraged many China observers to believe that reforms would lead to a more open and fairer business environment without any discrimination of Western companies. During the last months, however, it seems that many people are struggling with the question whether there are any Chinese characteristics to the word decisive, or even worse, that there might be a reverse trend to a more closed society, one that is less integrated into the international market. 30 years ago, there was the implicit deal of Western technology versus the access of Chinese market. Now, some see China selectively closing itself off in areas where it feels technologically strong enough to do so. The latest example is the discussion about the internet standards and cybersecurity. All of these observations are worrying because they run completely counter to the trends that lead to future growth. Further growth will be driven by connectedness, by the free flow of goods, services, people and information. Particularly, the rapid developments in the digitalization of the industry will lead to global value chains that connect distributed production across the world and go far beyond national borders. And the countries that can best integrate themselves into these value chains will be the ones benefiting most of this trend. I'm personally very convinced that there will be a new normal for global growth, and this includes openness. I'm also convinced that the Chinese governments will need to open up. But I also expect that the Chinese openness will continue to have Chinese characteristics for some time. My view on the current development is that China is fully aware of the fact that they have to open up, but that it is trying everything to push out the moment as long as possible in order to prepare the country and the industry for global competition. What we see is a very strong national view of the economy. I would call that a business environment with Chinese characteristics. Just take the name of the strategy for the transformation of China's manufacturing industry. It is called Made in China 2025 and not Global China 2025. But there are first voices from within China who are wondering whether this is the right approach. Li Shunfu, chairman of Geely, was quoted in the FT saying that the Chinese government had handed Chinese manufacturers a sugar-coated bomb in the form of the joint venture obligation for foreign companies. In his view, Chinese JV partners have become complacent due to the fact that they comfortably participate in the profits generated by the foreign brands and therefore do not or do nothing to enhance their own competitiveness. I hope that Mr. Li's views are echoed widely in Chinese policy discussions. I think it is in China's own interest that the new normal is defined by openness, without Chinese characteristics. It is also the world's best interest because we need a strong China integrated into global value chains if we want to generate further growth and prosperity. And there is another reason. Openness is a prerequisite for innovation. And in my view, the other key driver, and my third topic. Innovation has been and remains the key for the development in China. In 1897, BASF, after almost 20 years of research, started selling a synthetic version of the king of dyes, indigo. Over the coming years, these innovative solutions to the indigo from natural sources revolutionized the dye market, and it also became a huge success in China. But it only became a success in China after customers were convinced of its technological superiority, something that took a lot of effort and local investment in own dye works to prove the effectiveness of the new product. And again, BASF's history is only one example of how all companies entered the Chinese market at that time. The old normal of innovation was that you needed a superior product, technical sales staff to help introduce it, and local investment to prove that it worked. And there was a need to consistently keep up the speed of innovation. Just 5 years after the market launch of the synthetic indigo, BASF introduced a new category of light, resistant and color-fasting indentrane dyes in China. All this is very similar to the new normal of innovation in China. And already 1/3 of international companies derive more than half of their revenues today in China from locally designed, developed or tailored products and services. And BASF is not different. This year, we will open the second phase of our innovation campus in Shanghai, which is our largest research site in Asia Pacific and an important component of BASF's global research and development network. After completion, it will be one of our largest R&D sites globally. Our objective is to develop solutions from China for China. By 2020, we plan to have a quarter of our global research and development staff located in Asia Pacific region, and certainly the large majority of them in China. So the Chinese R&D platform will become an integral part of our global R&D activities. In fact, our objective is to find solutions from Asia for our global customers. China itself is undertaking huge efforts to change to an innovation-driven economy. China's R&D expenses as a share of GDP have reached the level of EU average. Also, China has tremendously increased the number of patent applications, and even so the quality of many of these patents is still questionable. There is no doubt that China is determined to generate more and more innovation. With that, China just requests again its historical position, as China was one of the most innovative countries before the Industrial Revolution started in the Western world. The times where copying and imitating were the key characteristics of Chinese innovation are coming to an end in my view. But will there be new Chinese characteristics for developing innovation? When you look at research about innovation systems, you will see that the concept of openness is key. Open systems tend to be more successful in generating innovation than more closed ones. And this seems to be true for companies as well as for national innovation systems. Co-creation, the idea of working together across all kinds of barriers, in our view, is the only path to new ideas. The magnitude of the challenges that we are facing today cannot be solved by one player only. We notice this in our own company. We are proud of our technological and synthetic scientific capabilities, but without working together with customers, industry partners, universities, governments, and NGOs, we cannot be successful anymore. Of course, we also bring this idea of co-creation to China. Yes, we need to integrate our BASF characteristics of innovation into the Chinese environment. But I'm deeply convinced that the new normal for innovation in China will also be built on openness. And still, there will be Chinese characteristics of innovation, and that is the potential strengths. Because if China really unleashes its innovation capacity to its full extent, it will fully step into or onto the global stage. Only through innovation beyond the pure technological sense will China be able to solve the tremendous challenges it is facing. But if it is successful, China will become a global superpower, and it will challenge many of our certainties in the West. Whoever is worried about this development needs to make its own homework to fundamentally strengthen the innovation power of the own company and the national innovation systems. For all who are strong as well, a strong China will offer a multitude of opportunities. During our 130 years in China, we have learned a lot about this country and about doing business here. Sometimes all of us, in my view, interpret too much and have been wrong with it. China always kept its intentions a bit fuzzy, to a certain extent to have freedom to operate. But we all together learned that global economic laws finally apply also to China, as well as general traits, dreams, and behavior of human beings do. With this experience, I'm confident that China will arrive at a new normal that will be beneficial for all of us. But I'm also quite sure that to be successful, we need to continue to be prepared for some surprises, have sometimes to take detours to adapt to Chinese characteristics, and we need to have a lot of patience in respect to the timing of certain steps. With this, I want to close and thank you very much for your attention and happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much. We have a microphone, so if you'd like to raise your hand and give us your name and what organization you're with. We'll start with Robin over there.
Hi, Martin. Robin Meredith from Goldman Sachs. Can I ask you a couple of things actually about other countries? Germany Inc., if you can put that hat on for a second, does of course a lot of business with Russia. And I'm wondering what you see from your perspective here as Russia's involvement with China going forward. Is it increasing? Can you talk a little bit about that? And secondly, Prime Minister Narendra Modi from India was just in Germany. Can you talk about relations between India and Germany for a second?
Yeah, Robin, I think I could talk an hour about Russia. Certainly, this is very high on the agenda for Europe and for Germany particularly. Germany's largest trading partner of Russia. Also, our company is very much engaged in Russia because we produce gas over there. What happens currently is certainly somehow concerning, very concerning because it's somehow a little bit a dead-end piece. I'm just talked with Tara on lunch about it. I'm very happy that we have business realities keeping a little bit the balance between politics and the real world. Because I think we need a stabilization and we need also somehow to bring back Russia into the global scene. I personally cannot imagine that we run a world with excluding Russia for a decade. If you look from European perspectives, I would say strategically it's not a great thing that Russia gets closer to China, because at the very end all the resources go to China. I think also in my eyes that Russia paid a high price now for the gas deal with China, because actually for a long time they have been discussing about the value and the prices, and I think they agreed upon because Russia pretty much made the prices China wants. So I think in that respect Russia counteracts to the business loss in Europe, but at a relatively high price and a worse margin for them. So I think from that perspective I think it would be good to balance out the interest. The second question was about Germany and India, sorry, yeah. Well, Germany and India always had a pretty constructive relationship, also on the scientific base to work on several projects over there. But certainly there were limits also in the cooperation broad, let's say, from the industry perspective. I think that will improve. I think that India will become a very important market for German export-oriented industries. I think also from the Indian perspective, what I hear by talking to politicians is that they also have the interest to leverage. They do not want to depend on the US and on China on the other hand, but also want to have a more multipolar world, and in that respect also German and European business. So I think overall that is a good development for all of us, because I think the Russian example tells us the more countries and businesses are integrated into each other, the more stake they have on the other side, the more this balances out also dangerous or maybe too dangerous and bold steps. So in that respect, I think it's good.
If I can just jump in quickly, while we're talking about globalism, I'm curious about your view of Hong Kong as a hub for multinationals. Whether you think its role is sort of dying, whether you still think it plays a very important role, especially vis-a-vis China.
I mean, first, everyone who knows me knows that I love Hong Kong, and it's hard to leave, I have to say. Well, I mean, if you look, I think on the role of Hong Kong when it was getting closer to China, it was 12% of GDP. Today, it's more 3% of GDP. So that is maybe absolute numbers higher, but in relative share, certainly less important. I think what we all experience is there are other gateways into China. There are free trade zones, and I think this will develop. There are internet routes, so it is not only the physical gate entrance of Hong Kong into China. So I think and I hope that Hong Kong is thinking about its role in the future by diversifying. I think it is not only about the old business model just to say this is doing it the next 20 years, but that we can develop Hong Kong in maybe something more broad. And what I have in mind is the management of technology and innovation, because I think that is, as I talked about, increasingly important. Not every company wants to go into China with innovation. And I think we also talk about using technology innovation beyond China. So in that respect, Hong Kong is a good place, because I used to say you are in China, but also you are not in China. So that could be one example, and I think Hong Kong could be thought leader in many more of these kind of aspects, simply diversifying its portfolio. Then I'm sure it can keep a very important role in doing business, not only in China, but in Asia.
Questions from the floor? Over here.
Thank you. Dr. Brudermüller, my name is Carsten Hess. I represent the Deutsche Post DHL group here, and you spoke about the new kind of supply chains, totally connected, IT-based. And I was wondering whether BASF has an idea on the new Silk routes China is pushing also tremendously. Several corridors, whether the north or south, ending up on rail freight in Germany now, or even in Spain recently with first pilot. So will that, I know that in Europe you're very strongly on logistics on rail. Is that a big part for your strategy in the future?
Well, I mean, for most of our products, it simply applies that logistic costs are in the range of production costs. So you cannot afford to transport millions of tons through the world. But if you talk about more specialty products, there it's different, because then the logistic part is comparably small to the value. Then it stays interesting, because we have some products where we have one global plant serving the world. And I think what is interesting indeed in the Silk Road concept, and it's partly a reality also, you have train systems from Germany to China, which take about 1/3 of the time than the shipping routes. And as we are very active, for example, in Chongqing, where one of these railroads starts and going to German Duisburg, you can ship your goods in 12 days to Germany. And if you think about products like HP, Hewlett Packard producing computers in Chongqing, it is basically can become a production hub for Europe even. So I think indeed that this thinking of Silk Road and developing infrastructure along this will change a bit trade flows, and I think it will change some of the competitiveness of hinterland provinces in China, which we thought are second tier, actually might be closer to Europe than the coastal belt. So I think there's a lot of interesting perspectives in it, maybe more for our customers than for us in transporting chemicals, but that is not least interesting, because at the very end, we only can grow with our customers. So I think very, very interesting, and we certainly factor that into our company strategy, how to participate best in this two coastal and old Silk Road belt.
Dr. Brudermüller, my name is Michael Jepson, Jepson Company. You mentioned the joint ventures and the importance of those in China. And I think it was interesting to hear what the Geely chairman had to say about the complacency as a potential danger in these joint ventures. My question would be, would you share that experience or that impression, and what is the future of those many key joint ventures that were all sort of established at a time when government, the state, played and still plays a very important role on that road to a more market-driven economy, as you were alluding to? What are the options? What are the potentials? And coming back to Hong Kong, we do have a university for science and technology. We have a lot of activities going on to exactly harness those facts that you mentioned as to the higher degree of IP security in Hong Kong, etc. Is this part of the BASF concept as well? Thank you.
Well, maybe I start with the second part. Currently, we have not any R&D activities here in Hong Kong, simply because you have also to focus a little bit on certain spots. We need a critical mass on the breadth, let's say, of creating new ideas, so you cannot open too many spots. But I would never exclude that if the landscape is getting even more important here, then this could maybe in future also play a certain role in the BASF system. Because at the very end, I think the factor in innovation is you need the brightest minds, and the brightest minds want also to live in the best places. And I think if Hong Kong really develops in a spot, or remains a spot where people want to live, then this is also where you get the right people to do innovation. Regarding your first question about the JVs, I mean, we run this very important and very big JV with Sinopec, which was a kind of the pioneering step in our industry. All the others that followed were more or less, we have been the blueprint of. Certainly, I mean, if you are a big company, the best thing is always to do things alone because you have totally freedom to operate. Over time, what I realize, it is difficult if you have one day when you start the joint venture, you align the interests of the company. But then if you go 10, 20 years, it is a very natural thing that both companies diverge on different routes about their future. And with this also, sometimes the fit of such a joint venture is just not that great anymore as it has been in the founding years. In our case, I have to say with Sinopec, it's good because we operate a huge plant. We are under heavy competition. I think we realized that we are complement to each other. So there is still the core interest in running a profitable business, and the fact that this, I think, is the most efficient, environmentally friendly chemical site in China. This has a huge value for both sides. But with other JVs generally, and this is not only applying for China, it's basically everywhere in the world, you have these problems of keeping the interests aligned. And I know that certainly also in the automotive industry, there's the one or the other company that struggles and would like to change, which is currently not possible. So I think there's always these two parts of the coin. We just have to realize that still in the cracker business, if you want to stay with the cracker still today, you could only own 50% of foreign ownership. Whereas, and this is good for us, most of the other areas in our industry are open. And that is also why BASF, whenever we can, do something alone. But as soon as it's complementary with a partner and makes sense also in considering a more longer time frame, we still would do a joint venture. So I don't know whether this totally answers your question, but that's a bit the perspectives I would give to it. Yeah.
Time for a couple more questions. Anyone in the audience? Okay, we'll leave it there. A lot of food for thought. We've traveled from China to Russia to India, back to Hong Kong. Dr. Brudermüller, thank you very much for joining us. We do have a small gift for you to take back to Germany from the FCC. And please do come visit us again when you come to Hong Kong. And thanks to everyone for coming today.